what's so important with the wrongful death situation that people don't understand is a lot of people will think, well, I don't have any assets, so I don't need a will. If you're in a wrongful death situation, you have a tremendous to be asset, a future asset through this cause of action claim. These are not small monetary awards, they're big money when they
Yeah.
finish, and they take years, but they have the potential to do so much with the money. And if you don't have the will, you don't have a plan for how that person before they die would want that money to be
To
spent.
be used.
That
And
legacy, that's their legacy.
welcome to Financially Ever After Widowhood, the podcast where we empower women to take control of their financial future after the loss of a spouse. I'm your host, Stacy Francis, President and CEO of Francis Financial, an award-winning and nationally recognized financial advisory firm. With the help of incredible guests, I'm ready to guide you through this challenging transition. Did you lose your loved one because of a wrongful death, passing away because of another person's wrongful act, maybe their neglect, mistake, or was there an accident? This could have been in a car accident, construction accident, or even in the hospital setting. This is a podcast that you have to listen to because you're going to learn so much from our amazing guest, Mary Beth Heiskell. She is a estate and trust attorney who has worked for decades helping individuals plan for their estate and plan for their loved ones. She has concentrated not only in estate planning and administration, but also has a expertise in residential real estate as well as Medicaid eligibility. But her superpower is working with individuals who have been impacted by 9/11. Mary Beth works with individuals who have loved ones who are very sick or have passed away because of collateral damage from being in the area of 9/11 during that horrific incident. She helps them make claims to the 9/11 Victims Compensation Fund and helps them navigate the maze of very confusing information out there to make sure that they and also you get the award that you are entitled to. Wrongful death is very complicated, and Mary Beth is so helpful to help you better understand what you're entitled to protect yourself, to make up for the economic loss of your loved one, and even be able to help your children with an award that they may be entitled to as well. So without further ado, please help me welcome our guest, Mary Beth Heiskell. Mary Beth, it is wonderful to have you here to talk about a topic that is so important. Thank you for joining us on Financially Ever After.
Well, thank you. I'm very honored to be talking with you today, Stacy.
I would love to hear more about kind of your journey, how you came to this work, and kind of your background that brought you to really advocating for people who need help. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you came here?
Sure, it was not necessarily a direct path. Sometimes I think I'm jack of all trade, master of none, but I'm proud of that. So I am an attorney, and currently I've been focused in elder estate law and some residential real estate. But my journey from law school, with family and life circumstances, I did some environmental law, and then I did some social work, some substance use counseling. So I have a very full background with a lot of focus, I think, on helping people. That's really
Hmm.
what I love to be doing and find fulfillment in my work. So, whatever kind of job title or label you want to give what I'm doing every day, as long as I feel that I'm truly helping people, that's what
Hmm.
matters to me.
Well, I love your work, and specifically, I'm excited to have you speak to our listeners today, those who have had potentially a loved one who has passed away or, are suffering that need resources. And with that, I'm going to just dive right in. What is wrongful death? What is considered wrongful death? And then I know we have more to talk about, like, what do you do then in those situations? But what is considered a wrongful death?
Sure. So as attorneys, we like definitions and we like definitions that include the term in the definition. So a wrongful death is a death caused by another party's wrongful act, but that could be neglect or default.
Hmm.
Specifically, examples that people can relate to are like a vehicular accident or a construction accident, medical malpractice, commonly seen in the hospital or the nursing home setting where a loved one dies and the family feels that shouldn't have happened, police misconduct resulting in someone's death. And then neglect could be caused by a party's harmful actions, carelessness, or failure to act. And then that results in that kind of situation. And even a product liability situation where a defective or dangerous product results in an individual's death. Those are all falling under that broad umbrella of the term wrongful death.
So if you have had to live through the traumatic experience of not only losing a loved one, but realizing it's a wrongful death for any of those issues or any of those circumstances, what do you do? I mean, do you talk to a lawyer? Do you reach out to your estate planning attorney? Do you reach out to a therapist? Like, where does someone go to understand the next steps?
Absolutely, yes. Sometimes you might know you're going to be in this situation because someone gets injured before they
Hmm.
die. So in that case, I really advocate, and that's one of the things I wanted to help people with today, for planning ahead because things can just go better if there's some planning done before you lose your loved one. Not that you want to be focused necessarily on the practical and or legal considerations, but it can really make a huge difference on the other side, if you will, if you do take that time and effort. If you're in this situation where it's happened and you didn't know, yeah, number one is go see an attorney or two and
Got
find
it.
someone who can help you navigate the legal and practical things, in addition to, like you mentioned, your own self care and grieving process. That's a whole other piece that would need to be addressed. And it's all, I can only imagine, overwhelming. So seek a lot of help and supports because there are people for that.
I mean, yeah, I can't even imagine, having to grieve the loss of someone that is so dear to you, but also realizing that that loss could have been avoided. And money will never bring them back. But can you talk to me a little bit about what are the damages that someone could receive? I mean, obviously there's the pain and suffering and unbelievable grief, but there's the economic loss and even the cost of caring for that person, right? If there had been like as you mentioned, Mary Beth, an accident, they ultimately ended up passing away. And during that time, significant amounts of care and you potentially having to be part of that caretaking team. And so needing additional help in other areas of your life. What does that look like? What does the economic recovery or economic damages, what would they even look like? And what would be things that you would need to think about?
Sure. And just not to undermine the important emotional and other components that would be in play, but to focus on my area of expertise and what I hope I can bring to the discussion, sort of a more nuts and bolts focus on the practical and legal. I just want to go back a moment to talking about in a wrongful death action, a person has died, so now the estate needs someone to speak for that deceased person. And that's the
Hmm.
point and a need for filing an estate and opening an estate and having that personal representative, executor, administrator to act on behalf of the estate and say, hey, something wrong happened here,
Hmm.
and I want to pursue a legal claim. And that claim has to then be filed against a defendant saying someone acted wrongfully, negligently, as defined by the law, that those actions or failure to act caused your loved one's death. You have to prove that. Your hopefully very able attorney will help prove that. And then that there's somebody left behind that's suffering and wants to be compensated for that, even though no amount of compensation will truly bring that person back or replace them. That's kind of the point of the action, is to try to get some reparation from the defendant. So those things have to be addressed. And then, yes, there has to be an economic loss evaluation, if you will. An economic loss includes the reasonable value of earnings of the decedent from the time they were first injured or became ill, let's say, to the time of their death. And then also the cost of healthcare expenses connected to that injury or illness, medical nursing bills, and the funeral or burial expenses. Those all come under economic loss. And then the other loss is pain and suffering for the individual who was injured and died, not really for the people left behind. The people left behind can get what's called like a replacement cost. They lost someone who was doing things in life for them, taking care of the home, mowing the lawn or the landscaping, vehicles
earning
maintenance.
An income, right?
Yeah.
Earning
the
income
becomes part of the economic, but this other replacement, it kind of really depersonalizes the person in a certain way by trying to value them and not bringing in all the emotional part. But I guess it's the only way the law knows how to quantify things in some way, in some organized fashion. So that's how that component is played out.
Can I jump in? I just want to repeat this back to you to make sure that I'm understanding. So
Yeah.
when we're talking about economic loss, it's the value of earnings lost. So that person, let's say that an accident that happened on a construction site, right?
Yeah.
Not their fault. The loss of earnings between the time of that injury and the death, the cost of, healthcare expenses, aid, medical, burial expenses, funeral. So that is economic loss. But then when we're talking about other losses, such as they mowed the lawn and now I have to hire someone, they cleaned the house, they did household tasks, that is separate. Is that right? And what do you
Yes.
call that type of loss again?
I know it as replacement. It could have
Replacement.
other terminology in different statutes. So because this is all mostly statutorily governed area, and it depends on each type, like a product liability statute that defines, the types of losses you can pursue under a claim. Or my familiarity is with 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund law, which is a very prescribed statute and defines, what kind of losses you can claim. And again, the suffering and pain might be there for the individual who got injured and died. So if someone gets, say, medical malpractice situation, something is done wrong somewhere in the hospital, that person has a lot of injury pain before they then die. That's something that can potentially be compensated through the statute. But again, it doesn't, not the person who's left behind.
Not the spouse living, right? Not the children, not the.
And what I was going to say is the one part that's different there is minor children. The law wants to provide something for minor children because society expects that they should have their parent till they're 18.
Yes.
Both their parents.
Well, I mean,
so
their whole life, but I get that.
Right. So if a parent is lost, then oftentimes there can be a claim there for that loss of guidance, nurturing, parental support.
For children.
Yep.
Okay. And then one loss that, and maybe we covered this, I'm sorry if we did, but someone, let's say a lawyer, earning $350,000 a year, they're 35, expected to have a 30-year career.
Yes.
That family does not have that 30 years of income coming to them because that person has died. Is that something that is considered a loss that could be compensated to the surviving family?
Yes. And without getting too detailed, there is like actuarial tables and a certain legal case law that is followed to evaluate, to literally value those types of situations as fairly and consistently as possible by the
Hmm.
courts. But that's what makes an estate in this situation so unique and
Yeah.
specialized,
Yeah.
because it's a whole nother element beyond just, is there a will saying who
Yeah.
gets what? Even someone who's retired, still has retirement, a pension. So
Yes.
that
Yeah,
can be valued,
exactly.
and it becomes part of a wrongful death claim, is finding out what that pension is, proving it
Hmm.
accurately within the legal action so that it can be part of the compensation in the economic loss part of things.
So what I'm hearing, there are all these different categories. And if you suspect that your spouse has passed away, or you are sure of a wrongful death situation, or your partner, you need a lawyer who knows this stuff. I've worked as a certified financial planner for 25 years, and I will tell you, this is all new to me. This is all new to me. And the impact that these financial benefits could have on a family who is suffering can be life changing. And I imagine, unfortunately, not everybody knows that they have rights. Can you talk to us a little bit about what someone can do to prepare legally? Let's say the situation where there has been a accident or someone is in the hospital because of a situation where someone did something wrong, right? Or something happened wrong. How can people prepare so that you're not finding yourself scrambling to learn all of this when they unfortunately have passed away?
That's exactly why I wanted to talk with you on this topic, because I've unfortunately seen too much emotional and real life overwhelm in these situations. Primarily,
Yeah.
the focus I've had is with doing work with 9/11 victim compensation fund claims and the spouses left behind in those situations. It's devastating. And there's a lot of, if I had only known this
Hmm.
before, I would have done these things differently. And so I want to be part of getting the word out there. I think first and foremost, not one attorney, but two. Two attorneys are critical. One for the wrongful death action, one for the estate filing. They're two highly
Very smart.
specialized areas of law, and one attorney wouldn't know all that. I'm honestly speaking on wrongful death, but I'm an estate attorney. But this is what I've learned, and I just want to share like this niche area that I've been working in. It's possible one large firm could have both types of attorneys, but honestly, often and best would be two attorneys in two firms, and they just have to communicate
Hmm.
and work
Hmm.
together to support you to make sure the action's being pursued, and then the estate is being properly opened, ideally expeditiously opened, and opened in a manner that addresses the wrongful death action, which I hope we talk a little bit more about at the end.
I think also, I don't
Yep.
want to say in any disrespect, but I feel like there are a lot of fantastic trust and estate attorneys out there that can help you with probate, probating the estate and guiding you there. But I think that it's much harder to find someone like you, Mary Beth, that understands how to document a wrongful death claim, how to, move through the system, how to start to value all these different areas that we've spoken about, everything from what is that pension worth? What was the, lifetime earnings, children, and just all those pieces. So I love and I'm so appreciative of that advice of, again, making sure that you have two lawyers and
Mhm.
that lawyer you are choosing to represent you in a wrongful death claim, that they truly operate in that area and know it forward and backwards, because this is a situation where making a misstep, I
Yes.
imagine, can drastically impact your claim and drastically impact your case.
Yes. And nobody wants that extra stress and strife
Yep.
in all of this. So when you're looking for an estate attorney, ask, are you proficient in wrongful
Mhm.
death estate
Yep.
work? Because it's
Yep.
different. I worked in a firm that had over 30 years of estate practice, and they had done some wrongful death. And then I did some, and then I learned and learned more and learned more, doing close to 100 different victim compensation fund estate openings. And since COVID-19 and all the deaths and the changes within the surrogates court, the practice of estate law has changed fairly significantly. And this piece on top of it, you just really want a good estate attorney to
Mhm.
help with this.
And
Yeah.
that's really important because that lawyer can help you document and make an accurate statement of their death and really make sure that you're dotting the I's, crossing the T's. One of the questions I have, is there a statute of limitation? Because there, I bet, are people listening today who are learning for the first time that there is a avenue that they can use to put in a wrongful death claim that could have life-changing impact on their family financially going forward. So is there a statute of limitation? And if so, what do you need to think about?
Yes, you do want to always seek to find out that statute of limitation. It can differ for each type of cause of action, if you will. So
Hmm.
product liability versus medical malpractice. A good, just general rule of thumb is 2 years after the death of someone from a wrongful death, but that's not, I'm just throwing that out there as like a marker. The 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund statute, there's no limitation right now, still, it's forever, which is a very strong statement that those losses should be somehow compensated, those horrible losses that families faced. But you need to know that information because it can close out an opportunity for filing an action if you're past that statute. And again, that all comes from a competent attorney to assist.
And so with the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund not necessarily having a statute, is there anything else that a widow should know about? Is the fund still fully funded? I mean, are there still resources and assets out there? I know that not everybody died in 9/11 that day, that it was, respiratory illnesses, cancer, even some illnesses 20 plus years later rearing their head as well. So, what are things, any other resources or things to think about for those people who had a loved one or even themselves who was there in 9/11? And I'm thinking, I literally live 2 blocks from the Freedom Tower, and I
Yep.
walk through the beautiful memorial several times a week. It's part of our life. And so many of our clients were here living downtown or workers assisting. And some of them are starting to get sick.
Yeah. And starting to get sick 20 plus
20
years
years
later.
later. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
So we are not anywhere near, quote, through this horrific event that happened in our state and in our country. So it's so critical. It's a part of too many people's lives. First and foremost is anyone who was involved in 9/11, thinks they might be involved, even if you worked in the area but weren't necessarily a recovery worker. If you were walking through that area to work, you could be eligible for a claim. So number one is to enroll yourself in the World Trade Center Health Program. There's a website through the CDC. It's www.cdc.gov/WTC. And that's a very important starting point because any claim will go so much better if you've been in that program. And even if you're not focused on the claim, you have rights to healthcare, some
And health
visits and
benefits.
follow-up
Okay.
that are focused on the illnesses that you might get. And then secondarily, yes, there's the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund claim website that outlines everything critical about the claim, the area, the defined New York City exposure zone, or the Pentagon or the Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and then the cause of death, which you mentioned earlier, is so critical with this type of claim and any wrongful death claim. A death certificate that clearly states a cause of death that will be helpful in your wrongful death action. If the cause of death is something like COVID-19, that's not helpful for a 9/11 victim who really needs a death certificate that says COVID-19 and acute respiratory distress syndrome due to or as a consequence of interstitial lung disease. The difference between those two is
Yeah.
like so important in this wrongful death action work. So you again want your attorney, you want your doctors involved So sadly, when that time comes, the doctor writes the right cause of death on that certificate and saves you a lot of effort and follow up to
Yep.
try to correct it later.
And I think that that's so key because writing the death as COVID-19, that person may not have passed away without those pre-existing conditions that were because of their exposure. So I think that that's so important. Another piece I really want to talk about, what if someone dies of a wrongful death situation and doesn't have a will?
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I know that's a question that, I mean, everyone listening, Mary Beth is our most prepared podcast guest I think we've ever had on Financially Ever After Widowhood. And I read that question that you had shared of like, you need to ask me this question. And quite frankly, when I read it, I was like, why is that a big deal? I
Uh-huh.
mean, people die without wills. I mean, FY, you should have a will, right? Everybody listening, get a will, right? Very
Right,
important. But why is it any different for someone who has passed away because of a wrongful death
right.
situation?
So I first just want to say, please do, like, if you know your loved ones in this situation, advanced care directives, healthcare proxy for medical decision making, power of attorney for financial decision making, and a will. Absolutely cannot recommend them enough. Pay for an attorney to help you with those. And I know you have other podcasts on this and resources to provide, so I won't go into that more here. But yeah, if you don't have a will, it's challenging. An estate can be challenging for anyone who doesn't have a will. But I think what's so important with the wrongful death situation that people don't understand is a lot of people will think, well, I don't have any assets, so I don't need a will. If you're in a wrongful death situation, you have a tremendous to be asset, a future asset through this cause of action claim. These are not small monetary awards, they're big money when they
Yeah,
finish, and they take years, but they have the potential to do so much with the money. And if you don't have the will, you don't have a plan for how that person before they die would want that money to be
to
spent.
be
That
used. And
legacy, that's their legacy. If I think of
yeah,
someone, a 9/11 hero, that's a legacy they leave behind, and their family is there. Like, I'm getting goosebumps right now because that's how
mm,
I have always viewed this. And so the will is the map. The will tells the court and the world, this is what I want to happen. Number one, who I want to be in charge of my estate and to pursue my cause of action, to finish what I can't finish or never was able to start. And number two, this is where I want the money in my estate to go when I'm gone.
yep.
And if you don't have that, you have basically a mess, is what I want to say, or a very large potential for a mess. I mean, in a best case scenario, people aren't fighting, but they're still, it's going to take longer for the estate to go through and be
Hmm.
processed in the court system without a will. That's the best case. And the worst case, people are fighting over who's to be in charge and then later who's to get what amount of money. And
Hmm.
then that can just be very expensive and emotionally exhausting and terrible. We live in a world where second marriages are common. There could be children from a first marriage. And it's very important to think about this and how it could play out if it's not carefully defined in a will or other estate plan, could be a
Yeah.
trust.
And I have to say, I mean, there are lots of conflicts when it comes to when someone passes away and there's money involved. And people sometimes will just say it's greed. But you know what, Mary Beth, when we look at losing our loved one, sometimes the money, it validates our relationship. It validates how much we cared to that person, right? So there's more to it than just the money. And so, again, that's why it's so important to have that will so that there are no disagreements, that you're really trying to make sure that their legacy is really carried forward. And I so appreciate that. We have gone through so much. I know we're coming up to the end, Mary Beth, but
I do
any
have one more, yeah, one more
exactly,
thing.
that's what I wanted to say. I wanted to open it
Sorry.
up for more thoughts that you might have and recommendations for everyone who's listening today.
Okay, thank you. Two things. One is just specific to what we're saying about If you don't have a will, then you have intestacy situation, and that means in New York State or wherever you might live, the laws govern how money will be paid out through the estate. And in New York, for a wrongful death action, if there are a spouse and no children, but parents living, those parents are statutorily a part of the estate. And actually, it doesn't actually even matter if there's a will or not. So if there are parents
Interesting.
living but no children and a spouse, the parents have a claim to recover in proportion to their pecuniary loss. So they definitely have an uphill battle if they haven't been involved the deceased individual's life, like say weren't being cared for by that individual living in their home. But that doesn't mean they don't have a right of action and a right to insert themselves into the matter. So people need to know that.
That's important because here
Yeah.
we've talked about a loved one, but the way I've been thinking about a loved one is a parent or a partner or a spouse. But what you're sharing too is that this is information that parents of the deceased also need to know about.
Yes. And the spouse needs to know because that estranged parent that you think has nothing to do actually may have to sign, will have to sign to accept the appointment of the spouse as the administrator of the estate. And that can
Wow.
be challenging
Yeah,
if you,
and I can see there being disagreements there potentially
yeah,
too.
yeah. And then there's the last thing to keep the time quick is any assets that can be disposed of. If you know someone might be going to die from an illness or an injury, a vehicle transfer title ahead of time.
Yep, transfer to your name. So it's
Yeah.
got it.
And
So if there's a house, if there's a vehicle,
yep,
maybe if there's a joint account, a joint brokerage account, transfer it to an account just in your name only.
yep. And a lot of times with 9/11 work that I've done, firearms are a big part of those individuals' lives, and taking care of them in advance can just be one less thing someone has to do
Yeah.
later. And it can be done potentially more easily in advance than after the person dies. So those are just things I bring up to think about. Little
And I have to
practical.
tell you, my mind is just racing. I saw something in our elevator. It always has interesting facts, and it said your brain can handle as much as 5 times the content on Wikipedia. I feel like I need to expand my brain because I just learned so much, and this is so powerful, and this is so important. And it is a podcast that is absolutely life changing for
Mm,
those families who have lost someone to a wrongful death or suspect it could be a wrongful death. And for all of you listening, I don't want you to worry. We are going to be putting all of these resources that we spoke about today and more. Mary Beth, as I mentioned, is the most prepared podcast guest I've ever met in my life, has also sent just a wealth of resources, anything you could possibly need, particularly if you think or know that your loved one has passed away because of a wrongful death situation. And also, we're going to include Mary Beth's information so that if you have questions or would like to retain Mary Beth, you can do so. And we'll include your information, your email, as well as a link to you. So, Mary Beth, I can't thank you enough for being here. This is a hard topic, but the information that you just gave, again, I know that you have changed many people, if not dozens, if not hundreds of people of lives who are listening today that didn't know about the options that are available to them. So thank you.
You are welcome. And I apologize if I overwhelmed anyone's mind, but I would rather do that in advance so they could
Yeah,
potentially address things more in advance. And then later, there are people to help. There are just people who
yeah.
know how to help with these things.
And the biggest takeaway for me, Mary Beth, whenever I'm overwhelmed, it tells me I need an expert.
Mhm.
Right. And so I hope that that also is the message that people realize don't go this alone. I would never go this alone. And I feel like I'm pretty on the ball and financially astute, but this is a whole nother area. And like you were mentioning, making a mistake could be financially catastrophic. So thank you again for being here, Mary Beth. I so appreciate it.
It's my pleasure and my honor. Thank you.
This was such a phenomenally informative podcast. It's information that so many women need to know because there are so many losses when you lose your partner. The loss of your partner and the love of your life, the emotional turmoil that goes along with that and grieving, but also the economic loss. And that loss is not only the loss of their earnings, but their role in the family, caretaking, keeping the house in order, maintenance, repair, so many things more than we think of. So many families are impacted by the death of a family member. And if you have questions about your finances now that things look differently for you, I encourage you please to reach out. You have so much on your plate, and the last thing that I want you to worry about is your finances. We are here for you. And you can reach out to me personally at Stacy, Stacy, at francisfinancial.com, or you can visit our website at www.francisfinancial.com. Thank you so much for joining us at Financially Ever After, and we'll see you in 2 short weeks. Thank you for tuning in to Financially Ever After Widowhood. If there's a question you'd love for us to answer on the podcast, we can do that for you. All you have to do is give us a call, and the number is 347-682-5580. Let me say that again, 347-682-5580. Whether you're working with an advisor or you're maybe doing it on your own, we invite you to reach out to us at www.francisfinancial.com, or you can email me at Stacy, Stacy, at francisfinancial.com. Our hope is to be a resource for you to help you also find a great financial advisor, whether that be with our firm or one of our trusted colleagues. Please be sure to like, rate, and subscribe to the podcast, and join us next time on Financially Ever After Widowhood.